We know a lot about how William Wordsworth spent his time in London. We know where he lived, we know who his friends were, his favourite walking routes, the bookshops he frequented and the places he most liked to visit. But that's not the kind of information he wants to tell us in the Prelude. He doesn't want to describe particular pockets of London. The poem is more concerned with communicating the sensory experience of being in the city, creating a feeling of immediacy in verse that corresponds to being impressed upon simultaneously by so many new stimuli. From his initial first-hand description, he wants to tell us how urban space is lived. Our experience as readers, encountering so many details that they wash over us, is exactly like that of the newly arrived visitor, and I want to consider this in a particular passage of the Prelude. At this point, I'm going to introduce what I think is the first cameo in reading the city. Since I get a bit tired of the sound of my own voice, I've enlisted my friend Madeleine Callaghan from the University of Sheffield to read some of the poem for us. Here she is.
And first the look and aspect of the place, the broad highway appearance, as it strikes on strangers of all ages, the quick dance of colours, lights and forms, the babbled din, the endless stream of men and moving things, from hour to hour the illimitable walk, still among streets with clouds and sky above, the wealth, the bustle and the eagerness.
Everything is in a state of constant movement here, except the clouds in the sky, which are the only fixtures, with all else beneath in flux. You'll notice that in contrast with his memories of the guidebooks, there are virtually no place names or landmarks in Wordsworth's description. He doesn't offer a panoramic account of London, but he zooms in on the street to convey what it's like to be in the city. He reports that there are too many colours to register individually, too many objects, a cacophony of sounds, a succession of moving images. Progress along the streets is difficult. Stalls, wheelbarrows and porters are all obstacles to the pedestrians. Beggars and horse-drawn carts appear suddenly on the path. Some of the verbs Wordsworth uses are potentially disorienting. Dance, whirl and veer. His language captures the excitement of being in the street, but with that there's a threat of exhaustion. Think of words like endless, glittering, dazzling, eager bustle. All these things that want to wear us out, and the consequence of this activity is what Wordsworth calls a weary throng.
The glittering chariots with their pampered steeds, stalls, barrows, porters, midway in the street the scavenger who begs with hat in hand, the labouring hackney coaches, the rash speed of coaches travelling far, whirled on with horn loud blowing, and the sturdy drayman's team, ascending from some alley of the Thames and striking right across the crowded Strand, till the four-horse veer round with punctual skill. Here, there and everywhere, a weary throng, the comers and the goers face to face after face, the string of dazzling wares, shop after shop, with symbols, blazoned names, and all the tradesmen's honours overhead.
There are objects of interest, but there's a too muchness about them in their plenitude, and that's indicated by the repetitions he uses. Hour to hour, face after face, shop after shop. And amidst this crowd, Wordsworth loses his sense of direction, positioning himself by reference to some vague alley of the Thames. He doesn't know London by attaching his observations to landmarks, but primarily he interprets the city as a teeming mass of people. The only faces he knows are the ones on shop signs, Boyle and Newton and Shakespeare, telling us vaguely what the shops contain. And you can see there's a near constant use of enjambment here. The quotation is all one big, long sentence. I want to give some notice to particular poetic techniques Wordsworth uses to convey to us readers the experience of being on the streets of London. At length, he says, escaped as from an enemy, we turn abruptly into some sequestered nook, still as a sheltered place when winds blow loud. Obviously, the roar of the crowd being likened to that of the sea. Wordsworth's simile here recalls classical epic, in which the heroes must find safe passage around monsters that whip up tempests in the ocean. When Wordsworth continues his walk through London, he uses another convention of epic poetry, which is that of the catalogue. The catalogue means listing things. In Homeric epic, cataloguing is used to give us the size of the Greek fleet. Homer starts listing all the ships. Meanwhile, in Paradise Lost, John Milton starts cataloguing demons to let us know how many evil spirits are in hell. Wordsworth uses the catalogue to accentuate the variety of life in London. It's a cosmopolitan city. The Industrial Revolution has brought labourers to manufacturing jobs in London, and the number of different peoples reflects the extent of Britain's trade overseas, which had risen dramatically in recent decades. The ethnic diversity startles the young man from the countryside. There are too many people passing by to contemplate as individuals. Wordsworth resorts to listing them as types, with repeated use of exaggerated adjectives such as all and every.
Among the crowd, conspicuous less or more, as we proceed, all specimens of man, through all the colours which the sun bestows, and every character of form and face. The Swede, the Russian, from the genial south, the Frenchman and the Spaniard, from remote America, the hunter Indian, Moors, Malays, Lascars, the Tartar and Chinese, and Negro ladies in white muslin gowns.
Despite all of this variety, Wordsworth insists that the city is a lonely place, and so his time there appears to confirm what he thought beforehand about nobody knowing their neighbours' names. He returns to this old conclusion despite the lively scenes he has just described. But those scenes haven't allowed any meaningful interaction with other people, as Wordsworth reveals in an intimate moment with a sort of confessional tone. It's a key moment in his account of London, and in this passage, isolation occurs as a personal crisis. The loneliness of the crowd has a destabilising effect that is not true of solitude in the sense of just being bodily alone. Being a stranger to so many other people puts the poet's selfhood in doubt. He loses sight of his own identity.
O friend, one feeling was there which belonged to this great city by exclusive right. How often in the overflowing streets have I gone forward with the crowd and said unto myself, the face of everyone that passes by me is a mystery. Thus have I looked, nor cease to look, oppressed by thoughts of what and whither, when and how, until the shapes before my eyes became a second sight procession, such as glides over still mountains or appears in dreams, and all the ballast of familiar life, the present and the past, hope, fear, all stays, all laws of acting, thinking, speaking man, went from me, neither knowing me nor known.
It's painful to the poet that he can sense but not access the interior lives of the strangers he meets. He's been entertained by the endless novelty of London, but his first-hand experience leads him to something he already knew as a child, when he heard reports that the city was a place in which one could be surrounded by people but know none of their names. And he was and remains fascinated by this paradoxical isolation. A crowd is not a community. Nobody appears to settle. Everyone in London, to use a word that the poet did earlier in the passage, is a vagrant. The multiculturalism of the city is little more than an appearance because of the lack of interpersonal exchange. Cultural diversity is effectively lost when there's no meaningful interaction, and there's an impersonal quality to the economic transaction that have drawn the crowds to London. The people around Wordsworth become insubstantial. He calls them shapes and dreams. A shop sign tells us what goes on inside the shop, but the poet can tell little of what goes on inside a person's head from his or her face. Recognizing that he himself is equally a shade or a ghost to others who see him in the crowd, the poet feels that his identity disintegrates. All the ballast of familiar life went from me. To go forwards with the crowd is a loss of identity, an unthinking act of conformity. It's a riposte to the tourist guides that the capacity to produce this feeling is the only trait of London that Wordsworth considers, as he puts it, exclusive. To be a stranger participating anonymously in the agitated rhythm of urban life is the shared experience of the city. Wordsworth says that he is oppressed by the overflowing numbers on the streets, but he has never felt more acutely alone. And that's the great take-home point of this week's lessons, that contradiction, because it recurs in so many literary treatments of the city from the 19th century onward.